The Texas sun beat down mercilessly as I turned onto the dusty road leading to my family's ranch. After 14 months deployed overseas, every familiar landmark made my chest tighten with emotion. The old water tower, the crooked fence post shaped like a question mark, the sprawling oak tree where my grandfather had carved his initials in 1952. But as I approached the property line, something felt wrong. I slowed my truck to a crawl, squinting through the windshield. My pulse quickened. Where my great-grandfather's barn should have stood, the weathered red structure that had sheltered horses and hay for over 90 years, there was nothing, just an empty patch of dirt and a pile of splintered wood pushed off to the side like garbage. "No!" I whispered, slamming the truck into park before I'd even fully stopped. "No, no, no." I stumbled out, boots hitting the gravel hard. The barn was gone, completely demolished. All that remained were the old foundation stones and fragments of red paint scattered across the ground like drops of blood. My phone was in my hand before I knew what I was doing. My neighbor, Mrs. Chun, answered on the second ring. "Daniel? Oh, honey, you're back. Thank God you're safe. What happened to my barn?" My voice cracked. "Mrs. Chun, what the hell happened?" There was a long pause. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't know. Your mother tried to fight it, but she was so overwhelmed with her surgery and everything. The HOA came through about 4 months ago." "What HOA?" "We're not part of any HOA. That new development, Sunset Prairie Estates, they expanded their boundaries. Some lawyer found an old covenant from the 1960s that technically included the eastern properties. They sent letters, Daniel. Your mom was in the hospital when they issued the final notice. They said the barn was a structural eyesore and violated their aesthetic standards. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. They can't do that. That barn has been in my family since 1933. They did it anyway, brought in bulldozers on a Tuesday morning. Your mom called the sheriff, but by the time he arrived, it was already half demolished. The HOA lawyer said they had legal authority. I ended the call and sank to my knees in the dirt. That barn wasn't just wood and nails. My great-grandfather had built it with his own hands during the Depression. My grandfather had taught me to ride horses in there. My father had kissed my mother for the first time under its rafters. I proposed to my ex-wife there before everything fell apart, and now it was gone, erased while I'd been serving my country thousands of miles away. The fury hit me like a physical wave. I drove straight to the address Mrs. Chun had given me for the HOA office, located in the pristine clubhouse of Sunset Prairie Estates. The development was exactly what I expected. Cookie-cutter houses in beige and gray, manicured lawns with identical mailboxes, and signs every 50 feet reminding residents of community rules. The HOA president, a sharp-faced woman named Brenda Whitmore, barely looked up from her computer when I walked in. "Can I help you?" she asked in a tone that suggested she'd rather not. "I'm Daniel Torres. You demolished my barn." Now she looked up, her expression shifting to practice condescension. "Ah, yes, the Torres property. That structure was in violation of our community standards. We sent multiple notices. I was deployed. My mother was having cancer surgery." Brenda's lips pursed. "That's unfortunate, but it doesn't exempt you from compliance. The covenant clearly states." "I don't care what your covenant states." I placed both hands on her desk, leaning forward. "That barn was built in 1933. It was a historic structure, and you had no right to touch it. We had every legal right, Mr. Torres. Perhaps if you'd been here to maintain your property properly, we wouldn't have needed to take action." The implication that my military service was somehow neglectful parenting on my land made my blood boil, but I forced myself to breathe. Losing my temper wouldn't help. "I'm contacting a lawyer," I said quietly. Brenda smiled without warmth. "You're welcome to try. But I assure you, our legal team has ensured everything was above board. Good day, Mr. Torres." I left before I said something I'd regret. My lawyer, Tom Vasquez, was an old family friend who'd handled my grandfather's estate. When I showed him the photographs I'd taken and explained the situation, his expression grew darker with each word. "This is bad, Daniel, but it might also be really good." "What do you mean?" "They destroyed a structure that's likely eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. That barn predated their HOA by decades, and this old covenant they're citing." He tapped the document I'd obtained. It expired in 1985. Someone renewed it fraudulently in 2019 without properly notifying all affected landowners. Your mother never received legal notice because they sent to an outdated address. Hope flickered in my chest. "So we can fight this?" "We can do better than fight it. We can bury them." The lawsuit took 3 weeks to file. We didn't just sue for the barn. We challenged the entire covenant, the HOA's expansion, and their demolition practices. Tom discovered they'd pulled similar stunts with 2 other longtime landowners, both elderly residents who'd been too intimidated to fight back. We consolidated the cases. The local news picked up the story. Veteran returns home to find family barn destroyed by HOA. The coverage was devastating for Sunset Prairie Estates. Suddenly, Brenda Whitmore was doing damage control on every local channel, insisting they follow proper procedures. But the evidence didn't lie. The judge was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Margaret Reeves. During the preliminary hearing, she listened to Brenda's lawyer drone on about property standards and community values. Then she turned to our side. "Mr. Torres, when was that barn built?" I stood. 1933, Your Honor. My great-grandfather Samuel Torres constructed it during the Depression. And you were deployed when this demolition occurred? Yes, ma'am. 14-month deployment in the Middle East. Judge Reeves removed her glasses, fixing Brenda with a stare that could freeze lava. "Mrs. Whitmore, did your organization verify whether Mr. Torres or his family had the ability to respond to your notices?" Brenda shifted uncomfortably. "We sent the required certified letters, Your Honor, to an address that hadn't been current for 7 years. Tom interjected. "An address readily correctable with a simple property records check." The judge's expression said everything. "I'm issuing a preliminary injunction against Sunset Prairie Estates HOA. All expansion activities are frozen pending full trial. And Mrs. Whitmore, you might want to consider settling this case. Because if what I'm reading in these filings is accurate, your organization is facing significant liability." The trial was scheduled for 4 months out, but we never made it that far. 2 weeks after the preliminary hearing, Tom called me. "They want to settle." "For what?" "Full reconstruction of the barn, using historic preservation standards. They'll hire specialists to rebuild it as close to the original as possible, using period-appropriate materials. Plus $200,000 in damages, a formal written apology, and they withdraw all claims on your property. The fraudulent covenant gets voided for all affected landowners." I sat down heavily. "They'll really rebuild it?" "Down to the hand-forged nail heads. They know they're going to lose at trial, Daniel. This way they control the narrative a little bit. But you get your barn back." I thought about my great-grandfather, sawing boards by hand during the worst economic crisis in American history. My grandfather teaching me the names of every tool in that barn. My father's weathered hands running along the wooden beams he'd helped repair a dozen times. "Make sure they use red paint," I said, my voice thick. "The same shade of red. It matters. I'll make sure it's in the contract." The reconstruction took 6 months. I was there almost every day, watching the preservation specialists work. They'd found photographs from the 1940s in the county archives, and were using them as reference. They salvaged what they could from the demolished wood, incorporating the original materials wherever possible. The lead builder, a 4th-generation craftsman named Ray, understood what the project meant. "Buildings like this," he told me one afternoon, "they're not just structures. They're witnesses. They've seen births and deaths, celebrations and heartbreaks. Bringing one back from destruction, that's sacred work." On a cool October morning, Ray called me over. "We're done." I stood before the barn and my throat closed up. It wasn't just similar. It was right. The peaked roof, the wide doors, the small window on the east side. Even the color was perfect. That deep red that seemed to glow in the sunrise. I walked inside. The smell of fresh cut would mingle with something else, something that felt like memory made tangible. The beams were strong and true. The loft ladder was positioned exactly where I remembered. In the far corner, Ray had even replicated the old workbench where my grandfather had kept his tools. "There's something else," Ray said quietly. He led me to the main support beam. Carved into the wood, preserved and reset, were my great-grandfather's initials, SD 1933. I traced the letters with my fingers. "You saved it." Found it in the rubble. Nearly missed it. But this seemed like the kind of thing that needed to come home. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. That evening, I stood in the doorway as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. My mother was coming home from her sister's house tomorrow. She didn't know about the barn. I'd wanted it to be a surprise. Mrs. Chin walked over from her property, moving slowly on her cane. She stopped beside me, looking up at the structure. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said softly, "not just of the barn, of you, for fighting for it. I almost lost it forever. But you didn't, and now it'll stand another 90 years, maybe longer." I thought about all the soldiers throughout history who come home to find everything changed. Some losses you can't recover. Some wounds don't heal. But sometimes, rarely miraculously, you get a second chance. You get to rebuild what was torn down. You get to stand in the doorway of something precious and know it's been saved. The barn stood solid and true in the fading light, ready once again to shelter whatever the years might bring. And I stood there too, finally home, finally at peace, watching the stars emerge one by one over the land my family had held for generations. Some things are worth fighting for. Some things can't be replaced. And some things, against all odds, can be brought back from the ashes. This was one of them.